Welcome to We Are Not Journalists, getting right into it. Now, listen, when you go on the campaign trail, Max and I, we go on the campaign trail, we talk to people, and it's just like there's so much disinformation about Ukraine. And no, the problem is if you talk to people that are, on the left, there's also disinformation about Ukraine. It's a weird thing, and there's like a weird dynamic. So I thought I'd bring in Charles McBryde, who has been to Ukraine. The one thing I do know about what you did is you were part of this program that was delivering medicine to seniors, like during the war. You've done a lot of other work that I'll let you talk about. But whenever we talk about Ukraine, you're like articulate about it. I like to leave in your comments whenever you post about it how much I love the Azov Battalion. And then you, to your credit, you just grab that ball and run with it every time. It's wonderful.
But that's a real thing that we hear. It's just like we either hear that we shouldn't be there because we're supporting a far right Nazi government, or we shouldn't be there because those tax dollars should be spent at home on billionaire subsidies, I guess.
Right.
So just for context, though, so Charles McBryde, you are unique not only because you've been there and you've been, doing a lot of volunteer work over there, not just that, but you're one of the random people with, the Ukrainian flag in your bio, but you also are very pro-Palestine and, sort of anti-apartheid.
All right. Hey. One globalist event at a time, Walter. Jesus. Everything. So Charles, what brought you to Ukraine?
Yeah, well, to clarify, I actually don't have the Ukrainian flag in my bio. And that's
God damn it.
That's a deliberate choice, but I do have, I have the tag for the humanitarian NGO that I helped set up there, Mission Kharkiv, so people can find that from my bio, and it's very clear that I support Ukraine. I find that having national flags, including the flag of Palestine, is just a very, I don't know. A poor choice to close the door to people who might actually be open to what you have to say. There's a lot of leftists who dismiss me out of hand if they encountered me from pro-Ukraine stuff, and they're often amazed to find out I'm pro-Ukrainian after finding some based take that I have about another subject.
Well, so what brought you to Ukraine in the first place? Like why the interest?
Right. So, I mean, I was a history major in college. I think much of my interest in the region started from there, and I was a double major in history and comparative religion with a focus on Eastern Orthodox Christianity, which obviously, Slavic countries, Ukraine, that's what it's all about. And I don't know, I guess part of being a history major, you're always kind of asking yourself the question of what type of person you would have been during specific historical epochs, whether it's the Spanish Civil War or ancient Rome. And the one that always stuck out to me is kind of, who would I have been in 1938? What kind of role would I have played during the rise of Nazi Germany, gobbling up most of Europe? Would I have been a collaborator? Would I have been a dissident? And that question kind of haunted me for a really long time. And when the war broke out in Ukraine, I felt like I had enough of a historical, spiritual, theoretical, and political understanding of the conflict that I needed to go there and help answer that question for myself, which is what type of person would I have been? And
that's so you don't have any family or personal connection. It's this
yeah. I think people are very. I think people are very surprised to find out I speak some words in Ukrainian. I can order food, say hello, say goodbye, sing some songs, but I don't have family there. I did have a previous Ukrainian ex-girlfriend, which was definitely a strong tie to the region and my first introduction to Ukrainian culture. Which
now,
I fell in love with.
What happened first? Did you have the girlfriend first and then decide to study Eastern Orthodox and learn the language and culture?
No, ironically, it was the other way around. Ukraine is a country of 40 million people, and they have been undergoing a lot of suffering. And now another genocidal attempt to erase them as a distinct people group, which is what this invasion is. And I decided to go and do what I could about it. I think it surprised a lot of people who only knew me from things like TikTok, where I'm just yapping and educating about stuff. But my background is in humanitarian human rights activism and relief work. So, I mean, my professional life has mostly been spent in and out of nonprofits. Which
no,
ironically
I like
is,
that. I like that because we are like, Max and I travel the country like documenting extremism, and I think there's a lot of people on social media. I mean, listen, for better or for worse, for whatever reason, they just, it's a lot of talk and it's not a lot of like getting out there.
Yeah, I mean, literally don't even vote. Yeah,
that is the problem with us big dirty leftists.
Yeah, but I do say that I think this will help you win the breakup. I think when she checks your Instagram story and sees your humanitarian work in Ukraine, that's,
oh my God, it's like, dude, look at me now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow, I hadn't considered that.
Walter and I would absolutely go into a war zone for pettiness. Like that's our North Star.
Max and I can't relate to any of this. We're like, okay, whatever.
We'll oppose fascism, but that's because fuck those guys.
Yeah, it's because it's not aesthetic.
Yeah,
I was not trying. I'm still very good friends with this person, and her family was actually was trapped in Kherson, and early on when the Russians occupied it, and so part of the first couple of weeks while I was there was trying to coordinate with people to give them directions to sneak past the Russian lines, which was a pretty harrowing, state of affairs.
Paint us the picture. So, how many times have you been there?
I have been to Ukraine 4 times now.
And since the conflict broke out?
Yep. Yeah, I had never been there. I had never been there before, and so I've now spent about 5 months there in the 2 years since the renewed Russian invasion. Most of that has been in the east of Ukraine, in the city of Kharkiv, which is about 11 miles from the Russian border.
So paint us a picture. So it's your first time going there. You cross the border into Ukraine. Like, what's that process like? What do you see? Like, because it's funny because we think of it as like there's a war going on, but people are still also living there. So,
right.
Like, what is it that you see when you walk down the streets? Like, what was it like when you first got there?
Well, I arrived on week 2 of the invasion, and so it was like chaos. I mean, it's been crazy contrasting my first trip there to my later trips, because there was a chaos and like a frenzy to that first time. It really felt like London during the Blitz in the 1940s. But I was in contact with a guy who'd been a former Ukrainian Marine in Mariupol, and he sort of coached me through the process for getting into the country, because obviously you can't fly in. And so I flew into Krakow, took a train to a border town called Ziemish, and then hopped off this nice like EU bullet train and onto this like crappy old Soviet boxcar, and crossed over the border and gave my passport to a female soldier who tried to recruit me into the International Legion right there off the train. She saw my ballistic helmet and my body armor, and she was like, "You coming to fight?" I'm like, "No, I'm just here to volunteer." And she's like, "That's a pity." She hands me a Foreign Legion like questionnaire thing. She says, "If you change your mind, let me know." So I kept that in my pocket the whole time, but I never filled it out. And but it was chaos. I mean, coming off that train, it was like this mad scramble over the tracks. It was weird to go into the country while everyone else is waiting at the train station to come out. Because at that point, most Ukrainians were leaving the country, whereas now a lot of them have come back and are staying in the Western region.
I know exactly what you're saying, Charles. So like I did a reverse commute once. I remember I worked in Greenwich, Connecticut, and I'd be at Grand Central at the Metro North, and I would, everyone's coming in to the city to go work on Wall Street in Midtown. And then I would be going to Greenwich, Connecticut. And so I relate a lot to what you're saying.
Yeah, it's exactly the same. Through. Yeah, there are no differences.
I mean, there's a lot of parallels that we could draw. So yeah, so thank you for that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean it's good to find common ground. Greenwich is a pretty dicey
The
place
Greenwich,
these days.
Connecticut. Yeah. Oh God, it's funny.
hmm
And then
Yeah, no, it's the same thing.
Yeah, it's very similar.
No,
Yeah,
so it's kind of, but it's like the danger hasn't passed. It's just people have just gotten used to the new normal.
It's more. So I think that fear comes a lot more from the unknown.
Oh, sorry. That question was for Walter.
Oh yeah, my bad. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still processing it, and it's very therapeutic to listen to Charles talk about it. So thank you.
Yeah, because I've been to Connecticut, and
yeah.
It's a tough spot. Yeah. I remember I went to the Greenwich Polo Club one time, and having this like elderly, slightly predatory gay man buying oysters for a table of like 19-year-old kids who were there on a modeling trip for Ralph Lauren. It was just about as harrowing as anything I've experienced in Ukraine.
Well, that's good to know. But I guess in terms of the populace, because I mean, the war's still like basically no end in sight. Are people just like tuned, like just sort of like have a background idea, like the idea if you live in like Tornado Alley in the U.S. that you're just like, okay, I'm living my life, and sure, every now and then my house might get completely blown to smithereens, but if that happens, they'll play the siren and I'll walk over here.
Humans are extremely adaptable creatures. I think that's slightly different in the case of Ukraine, but in large part, the population has adjusted to the near constant threat of potential Russian attack. A lot of stuff has changed, but mostly once the Russians retreated from around Kyiv, everyone had a much better idea of the safety situation. And the battle kind of went back to the east and the south, and the only imminent danger that the Western cities faced was of ballistic strikes, which take a really long time to get to the Western cities. Ukraine is the largest country in Europe. I don't think people realize that. It's massive. It's like the distance from Sacramento to Los Angeles. And so that's a long way for a missile to travel, even when it's fired from right near the border.
God, and that's funny because you really don't think of that, because you think like missile, and then it's like, and I guess probably so. Kharkiv is on the eastern edge, right? Like it's way east of Kiev, right?
Yes, very far east.
And so like, how far is that from the front lines these days?
I guess the front line in the east right now is kind of around Chasiv Yar, which is about, I mean, on the roads that are available now, it's about a 45-minute drive. But the Russian border is a lot closer to the front line, if that makes sense. A lot closer than the front line, because there's the Kharkiv region has. Yeah. So I know that sounds confusing, but most of the Russian thrust is in the south and in the east. A
different part of the Russian border.
Right, exactly. So in Donetsk Oblast, the Russians share a border with is a massive border with Ukraine, and they could be fighting. They initially occupied all of the area around Kharkiv. They got pushed back in September of 2022. And since then, they haven't. I mean, they're currently trying sort of on the Kharkiv axis. I think they want to hopefully make a play for the city sometime in the next year. But they got pushed back pretty hard in the end of 2022. Mm-hmm. And once the city was outside of artillery range, that's when the entire axis of the war shifted to Donetsk, and it became more about Bakhmut. And that's when you hear those famous cities, Avdiivka and Bakhmut, which now everybody knows.
Right. That's in Donbass.
That's in Donbass. Yeah. But it's below Kharkiv and to the east.
Okay.
But Kharkiv, the missiles that come to Kharkiv, they come from Belgorod, which is very close. It's like 40 miles away. I always get my kilometers and miles confused. Mm-hmm. But I mean, when a missile pops up from Belgorod, it's like 90 seconds. You have to figure out what's going on, which is way different from being in the far west of Ukraine. You're practically in Poland, and you get like 30 to 40 minutes warning.
And do they have the infrastructure for that? Do they have bomb shelters and?
That's the
Like,
funny
base
thing
races.
about Kharkiv, man. And this is one of the great ironies of history and one of those juicy little tidbits you learn when you have an autistic fixation on the Second World War, which is that basically Kharkiv had 5 battles during the Second World War. And it got traded back and forth between the Nazis and the Soviets several times. And the city was obliterated as a result of these constant battles. But after that, Stalin rebuilt the city to be a massive bomb shelter. So all of the infrastructure of the city makes it nearly impervious to missile attacks and bombing raids. I just don't think
Russia.
thanks to
Stalin.
Russia. And I think Stalin never anticipated having to give that back to the Ukrainians. And so it's really funny that, like, the fact that Kharkiv, a Russian-speaking place right on the Russian border, is still in Ukrainian hands is really frustrating to Russia. What's even more frustrating is that they built the infrastructure for Kharkiv to be able to survive their constant missile attacks.
Well, actually, so that's a good opportunity
That's
to
such
take
good tea.
Yeah,
I feel like I'm in like I feel like we're like the Kardashians right now. It's just like, oh my god, you know, like.
But this is something that people say about the war. This is something that idiots say about the war is they speak Russian. They used to be a part of Russia, right? So why shouldn't Russia just get it back?
Yeah, I mean that's the anti-imperialism of idiots. It's a historical naivety almost without precedent. And it shows that people are more interested in the aesthetics of revolution than the practicalities of it. Their solidarity extends mostly to people who are opposed to the United States empire, which they believe is the only one that really matters. And so anyone who is opposed to the United States imperial interests must default be good, whether that's the Islamic Republic of Iran, People's Republic of China, or the Russian Federation. And the reality is that all of those are independent imperial actors which have histories of massive repression within their own spheres. And there are leftist groups.
No, we hear from the left who are like, we are anti-imperialist, and we are so anti-imperialist that Russia's attempts to colonize Ukraine, we're 100% behind. And I'm just like, I mean, I think that people on the left have a really strong idea of how Russian propaganda affects conservatives, and they don't consider the fact that they themselves are targets.
This is kind of the horseshoe theory spectrum of, like, you have people on the left who are deeply anti-Russia, and then you go the further left you go, at least in the authoritarian direction, you get people who are just actively simping for Putin and Assad and covering up their attempts at ethnic cleansing and genocide.
So like, I think it's a funny thing in terms of all the, because like I've heard all of the propaganda at this point, and it's like it's for different reasons. Like they're, you know, like maybe like right and left might oppose the war, but the propaganda that goes along with it is always different. So I'll give you, we know the left-wing propaganda. It's we can sing it, we can all say it together. It's like, well, you know, the US was, you know, strangling Russia, NATO,
right.
You know, they were just being so much, they were just surrounding Russia with NATO countries.
Right, and Ukraine
Russia
is
felt
part
strangled.
of a plot.
Right, Ukraine is a proxy government full of neo-Nazis. You know, it's a zone of opportunity for neoliberal development. You know,
we want to expand our sphere of influence through military might and military-industrial complex and yada 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 yada.
Yeah, but I'm not done with my propaganda yet. So here we go. I'm just reciting all of it by heart. So it's the CIA rigged the election in what, 2014, 2015?
2014.
To get a some pro-Western, influence in there, and that's when,
because the Russians would never touch a Ukrainian election.
Yeah,
it's a free and fair election.
Yeah, I mean, you know, Putin's just there, like, oh, just fingers crossed, everyone, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's I mean,
the fact that anybody takes anything the Russian government says at face value is just wild to me. I mean, it shows a historical naivety that's just insane.
Capitalism break, friends. See you in just a minute.
So I'll go over to the right wing. That's the one talking point that is sort of shared when I go to MAGA rallies, when you talk to people on the far left. So that's the one thing. Speak to that, where it was like they were just sort of forced into it. And
right. I mean, so as you've mentioned, it's kind of a grab bag of like random talking points that you're going to encounter. It's like, first of all, Ukraine is corrupt. Ukraine is corrupt. Ukraine has a massive neo-Nazi problem, which again, the right wing doesn't care too much about, but they're willing to invoke it as this kind of gotcha, whereas the leftists are actually
battalion, yeah.
And then also,
my thing with that is, the funniest part about that is, so I try to tell people, say, listen, if America was attacked by another country, and just say, let's all of us, the citizenry, we all, join the military tomorrow, right? I would be, Max, all three of us, all of us would be serving alongside the rest of America. We'd be in the same battalion as people that were Proud Boys, people that were, Boogaloo Boys, You could go down the list of just right-wing nonsense. I would be with people that like listen to Matt Walsh.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, man, like your average police department in the United States has more Nazis than I've met in Ukraine. If I'm being perfectly honest, I've been all the way up. I've been farther into Eastern Ukraine than most people who've even been to the country during the war, and I have met, I would say, the commensurate level of Nazis that I would expect to find in the Los Angeles Police Department. But that does not matter for the purposes of propaganda, because Putin made this entire thing about denazification. It's a complex issue because Ukraine has a slightly sordid legacy of collaboration in the Second World War, as does every European country, including the Western ones, including all the ones that are in NATO. But also, again, these things have nuances, and I'm not trying to say that as some sort of like big brain take.
Nuance. I don't.
No, yeah. Like
I believe we killed nuance 8 years ago.
If you've ever talked to a Finnish person about the Winter War and like what it meant for Finland to be caught between the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany, and at times accept help from Nazi Germany in order to fight the Soviets, you're going to get into a historical question, which is a lot more nuanced than this black and white. There were the red guys were the good guys and the Nazis were the bad guys. It's all the Eastern European countries were victims of the Soviet Union before they were victims of Nazi Germany. And for the most part...
And I just want to clarify so no one clips it. It's not that there were good guys in this situation. These were all a collection of bad guys that you're leveraging to survive.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Thank you for that, Max. Yes. Right. I mean...
I don't want to get into saying that the Nazis were the bad guys here.
At least they weren't communists.
Yeah, but like not a lot of people even realize that like the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany had signed something called the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact in 1939, which was a non-aggression treaty that allowed them to divide up Eastern Europe between cooperative Nazi and Soviet spheres. I mean, the official propaganda of the Soviet state was that we are friends with Nazi Germany for 2 years until Operation Barbarossa started and the Germans invaded. So everyone who was caught up in that, whether in Belarus, in Poland, in Ukraine, you've got all of this smattering of independence movements. You've got partisans, you have revolutionaries. You have about 250,000 Ukrainian resistance fighters who are willing to work alongside the Nazi Germans to give the Soviets a black eye. On the other side, you have 6 million Ukrainians fighting for the Red Army against Nazi Germany. And about almost like 1.7 million of those gave their lives to defeat fascism, which nobody ever talks about the Ukrainian legacy of anti-fascist resistance during the Second World War. Meanwhile, the collaborators on the other side, which a lot of them had terrible anti-Semitic views at times, were historically very unreliable for the Germans, which is why the Germans kept imprisoning them and trying to destroy their movements.
I am worried that we're getting a little abstract.
I can go into the history of this stuff so long.
No. We have activated a special interest, and believe me, I get it. But like one of the great things about having you on the show is you do have all this like personal firsthand experience in Ukraine, and because there's all these ideas of what even Ukrainians are feeling right now, right? They're because there's some people who have deluded themselves to the point that like Ukraine is annoyed at the U.S. for arming them and prolonging this war is a real thing that we've heard. And so like what is the mood and attitude towards the invasion? Like what?
Yeah, well,
what do you hear?
If I could communicate one thing to everyone who wants to talk about Ukraine, especially leftists, is why are you not talking to Ukrainians about this? Why are you not including Ukrainians in your conversations about Russia? Why are you not including Ukrainian leftists in your conversations about Russian imperialism and the war in Ukraine? Because whenever I encounter like a dumbass take about Ukraine, it's from someone who has not bothered to ask one of the 40 million Ukrainians currently experiencing this Russian invasion what their opinions are on the whole thing from across the political spectrum. And so that I always say, like, listen, there are Ukrainian leftists who have been very vocal about this. Like, go talk to them, get their perspective. But they don't actually want to do that because, again, Western leftists, they engage in politics in the same way that people engage in like football fandoms or like the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It's this kind of thing where they're the heroes and they're the villains. You know, Iran and its proxies are engaged in this axis of resistance against the United States. Russia is sometimes allied with them. Their spin-off series, you know, that's like how they think about this.
I can understand like part of this because whenever the United States is involved in something, I'm a little sussed out. I'm like, all right, none of this is
as you
happening.
should be.
I mean, once this is all said and done, I 100% expect, you know, companies like BlackRock to run up into Ukraine and be like, oh my God, like what? Let's do all of this. Right?
Opportunity zone.
Expect them once they have to pay back this loan to Ukraine has to sell off its natural resources.
Right.
I mean, people on both extremes of the political spectrum have a hard time auditing their own thoughts and don't react well to like basic questions about like, oh, okay, why do you think that? Or like, if this is true, why this? And I think that's why they struggle with the idea that the military-industrial complex is bad, but the idea of the U.S. wants to expand its soft power, right? And wants to have a sphere of influence. And that doesn't necessarily make them the bad guys in every engagement. Like they could have a bad core want of power, but still achieve like positive effects.
And honestly, the way that I have to talk to leftists about this is like, you have to bring up the idea of Hamas. So Hamas receives material assistance from the Islamic Republic of Iran, right? They are not completely aligned with Hezbollah or with Iran. Hamas is kind of in it for Palestine. They're trying to do their own thing. You know, they're trying to free Palestine, more or less. You know, I mean, I have a lot of criticism of Hamas, but they are leading the resistance for better or worse.
Hot take. You have criticism of Hamas.
I got in a lot of hot water for that recently among the very same people. But like in the same way that you could support Palestinian resistance fighters, be they Hamas or otherwise, even though they get assistance from Iran, which is a terrible imperial country, which is deeply authoritarian and very anti-leftist, by the way. You can support the Ukrainians in their independence struggle, even though they're getting support from the Western version of Iran. You know, you can believe two things at once, which is that the United States is a deeply cynical imperial power, which has its interests in the region. And that Ukrainians are very grateful for their help as they are resisting genocide from their historical regional bully, who is also a deeply imperial regime.
You're calling what's happening in Ukraine a genocide?
Absolutely.
You texted me. You were like, it's a genocide. The Russians are just not as good at it.
Yeah.
In your opinion.
I mean, if you look at first, like the intent aspect of genocide is very important. Everyone inside Putin's regime, as well as the sort of ancillary media apparatus attached to the Russian state, has made it very clear that they long for the de-Ukrainianization of Ukraine, invoking settler colonial experiments of the past and claiming that all of that land is Russian. That has been followed through by actions like collective punishment, attempts at starvation, rape as a weapon. Also, the one that nobody even talks about is the fact that like Ukrainian children have been taken from Ukrainian villages and cities that are occupied and sent to Russia to be raised in Russian homes. Like that is actually one of the things that the United Nations says is a clear indicator of genocide. Again, they're just less effective at this than the Israelis are. But the Russians are trying to de-Ukrainianize Ukraine, and they can't do it because Ukrainians are shooting them with American-made weapons, frankly.
Now, do you think the reason that they're less effective is just because Ukraine has a better ability to protect itself?
Yes.
Okay.
That
was a pretty leading question there.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, Ukraine's access to Western arms and material have been its lifeline. If Russia actually defeated Ukraine, they would be dealing with the world's largest insurgency for a very long time. So it's not like if they defeated it, this would all go away. But Ukraine, as a nation state, as an entity, is able to defend itself from this genocide strictly because of its access to Western material, which is why that's important. It's why I support United States aid for Ukraine, but condemn it for Israel. These weapons are tools. They're being used for two very different purposes.
Well, yeah, I mean, just the power dynamic, like who's the weapon going to, the oppressor or the oppressed? Now, interesting. So, say United States is like, that's it, nothing more for Ukraine. What happens over the next week, the month?
In order to get a decent idea of this, you should look at Syria in the wake of the civil war, particularly the autonomous administration of Northeast Syria, which is known as Rojava. It's kind of the democratic proto-anarchist experiment happening in the north of the country. It cropped up during the civil war and initially was opposed to, Assad and Russia and all of these, and ISIS and Turkey. And it was able to fight all of them off with United States material assistance. And then in 2018, Trump pulled the plug on that.
That was like, so that Rojava, that was the one that was, I thought it was Rojava, my bad, but it's Rojava. So, and that's the one where it's like female, like women leaders.
Yeah. They've got the female, the women's protections units. So in the press, they call them
sort of like, everyone's like, wow, that's kind of a cool way that they had set up their community.
Yeah. So that's another fixation if you want me to open that book. But yeah, that's the way the press calls them the Kurds. When they talk about, they said Trump betrayed the Kurds or Trump has left the Kurds. I mean, the truth is there's a lot of people. There's Kurds and Arabs and Yazidis and all sorts of other people involved in this sort of proto-anarchist society being created there. But anyway, when the United States abandoned them, they had to start getting real clever about how to survive. And that meant entering into a complicated series of kind of non-aggression pacts, as well as, loose alliances with people who had previously been their enemies. Ukraine is in the situation where, like, Ukraine's not going anywhere. The Ukrainian state is going to survive. And when people talk about, well, can the war in Ukraine be won? The war in Ukraine was won the minute that the Russians pulled back from Kyiv and no longer threatened the capital. At that moment, we were guaranteed the future of the Ukrainian state as a state was guaranteed. The only thing being fought over was its borders.
Mm-hmm. Even Russia has said that, like, they'd end hostilities if they just gave up, like, I don't know, what like some huge portion. Right.
I mean, that's the thing. Like, I think people, again, they have no idea how big Ukraine is. And when the Russian peace plan involves taking over cities like Zaporizhia or Kherson, you're talking about things that are the size of Detroit and Minneapolis. Like, these are massive population centers in a territory the size is greater than the United Kingdom. Like, I don't think people realize that Russia currently occupies part of Ukraine's sovereign territory that is larger than the United Kingdom. And these leftists and anyone who says that we just need to peace with Russia, they're saying you get to take a section that's larger than the UK away from Ukraine for the sake of peace. Well, and then we're going to let you do it again 20 years from now.
Well, I mean, keep in mind, these people have no idea, no historical basis. So, if we appease Russia in this way and give them just this small territory, surely they will stop.
Yeah, history, surprisingly, revisionist take here. History is very kind to appeasers. They have it figured out. When you stop an aggressive power by giving it your land, they tend to stop and they don't ask for anything more. Mm-hmm. That's one of those little known facts of history. It's ridiculous. Like, they did this in Georgia in 2008. They did it in the east of Ukraine in 2014. They thought they could do
Georgia, the country.
Yeah, I wish they had invaded Georgia, the state. I would prefer Russian rule over the state of Georgia than its current government. But I'm from South Carolina, so
We've heard that.
like about 30% of my identity is just hatred of the state of Georgia, and particularly its football team.
I've loved that states have that. I grew up in Michigan, and I personally had it in for Indiana, even though the football rivalries with Ohio. But I just love that one of the great things about the United States is anyone from any state has a state that they just fucking can't stand.
Yeah. For instance, Georgia and North Carolina.
I'm from New York, so I mean, it's sort of like that. You know that area between New York and LA? It's like that. It's just, hate it.
Walter, come on. You don't have a specific loathing for people coming in from Jersey?
Jersey, Jersey, right? But like more like Staten Island, if Putin wanted that,
Well, I mean, and that's the thing. Like, I'm waiting for New Jersey to claim Staten Island because it is, historically and genetically New Jersey. I mean, like,
that would be the easiest war. People. I'd be like, sure, like, all right, you guys already hate New York enough anyway. Go for it.
Yeah, and yet the Ukraine won't do the same. And
it's so
and that's sad to see. It's so unreasonable.
So what are the other conspiracies we hear about? It gets so much more creative. We have audio of they do the whole the deep state has like the chemicals and like
biolabs. I forgot about the biolabs. Wow, we haven't heard about that in a while, have we?
Yeah, and it's amazing propaganda. When you hear that, you're like, oh my god, like that is like Putin's just like, oh my god, this is amazing. So the best one we heard was that Modi, Trump, Xi Jinping, and Putin are all like white hats working against the deep state. Mm-hmm. And there's biolabs.
I love that. Wow.
Yeah, and also here's the
Patriot Xi Jinping.
Yes.
Yeah. Big anti-communist Xi Jinping. So the other one is it gets into this sort of Christian, nationalism, Christian Zionism thing of like where they're like, because Zelensky's Jewish, they're like, well, they're executing Christians in Ukraine.
Yes.
And that talking point works in MAGA circles because Zelensky's Jewish, so of course they're going to be executing the Christians.
Of course, he must answer to a higher power. Can I be allowed a brief fixation moment on the Christian persecution in Ukraine thing?
Yes.
Yeah.
So this actually became very relevant because I'm part of one of many Ukraine assistance group chats where we coordinate relief on Signal. And I got added to this while I was in Ukraine, not realizing later this is predominantly church ministry groups who were coordinating in this chat. And everyone in there was like people who were associated with various church groups or missions groups, mostly Protestant, low church, evangelical. And all these news articles started to drop about Christian persecution, how Zelensky was telling people to defrock priests of the Orthodox Church and deport them and take them out of the churches. And literally, there were people in these groups who were responsible for bringing millions of dollars of assistance into Ukraine, being like, that's it, we're pulling out of Ukraine. I can't believe Zelensky's persecuting Christians.
Yeah.
And I had to go into this. I was like, hey, by the way, so I actually have a degree in, and these are people who'd worked in Ukraine. Like, they should know better. I said, I have a degree in comparative religion. And what this is the Russian Orthodox Church is separate from the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. However, there's still a large influence of the Russian Orthodox Church inside of Ukraine. That is historically important because since the time of Ivan the Terrible, the priests of the Russian Orthodox Church have essentially acted as agents for the Kremlin as a part of their spy apparatus, their intelligence gathering apparatus. And they continue to do so in Ukraine to this day. So you have the Russian Orthodox Church, which split from the Ukrainian Church in 2018 because of this issue, essentially operating as a spy ring inside the country it's invading. So Zelensky was using the Secret Service in Ukraine to round up spies, which was kind of a non-thing. But because of the way it got spun, Christian communities in the US got to frame this thing as like Christian persecution. So just being able to explain that to them prevented millions of dollars of funding.
Jewish. because Zelensky's Jewish.
Yeah.
Like that just threw just gasoline on that fire.
Zelensky and his Nazi friends are teaming up.
Yeah, I know. That's the part. Yeah,
No,
Zelensky's Jewish. They're persecuting Christians. Also, Zelensky's a Nazi. Also, the Azov Battalion. And you're like, what? You're like, huh? You know, Xi Jinping, anti-communist.
Again, it's a grab bag, dude. There's no like, all of these people, whether it's MAGA or like red fascist tanky types, their ability to handle massive cognitive dissonance is so large that they will just reach into this grab bag of takes and throw it out there without ever considering how these things relate to each other in a sensible way.
Hey gang, go stretch your legs. We'll be right back with more from Charles McBryde in just a minute.
Again, these are deeply unserious people, and the only problem is you have to deal with them because they vote and they affect policy and they affect public opinion. And so you have to spend time debunking these terrible takes. But I've gotten calls from congressmen asking me about Christian persecution in Ukraine or like whether there's biolabs.
Yeah.
And these are people who sit on the appropriations committee who are directly responsible for whether...
Are these Democratic or Republican congressmen that have called you?
Both, but mostly Republican, because I still have some connections to, like, I mean, growing up in South Carolina, I was deeply political. So I still have some connections to, like, Republican politicians from South Carolina who know that I disagree with them on everything, but know I worked in D.C. for 3 years and know I went to Ukraine. And so they asked me, like, relevant questions about that.
Well, I guess I'm glad.
What are you guys listening to? Yeah,
no, but at least they asked, right? It's far more dangerous if they.
But I'm not an expert on this. I'm just a dude that went to Ukraine and helped set up a humanitarian effort, and they're asking me about the
are they
payload.
Like friends with your dad? Like I feel like that's very much a I have a kid who went to Ukraine, and I'll ask him.
No, it's that kind of like Southern. It's less my dad and more my mom. My mom was like deeply involved with Republican politics before she kind of got a little disillusioned with that. But no, these are just people that, like, when I was 12, I would go to campaign rallies for these people, and now they're like sitting members of Congress, you know, on all these committees that have to do with helping Ukraine. And they're like, oh yeah, I heard that boy, he went to Ukraine. Let me ask him about the payload for the missiles we're sending over and whether that should be reduced or increased or whether it can hit Russia. I'm like, bro, like,
no, dude,
why are you asking me?
Federal government, there used to be a line where they knew better, but like since MAGA came into power, they've elected people that legitimately are from their same broadcloth, and they're like, they go in legitimate. They speak at these QAnon events, and it used to be easy to know that they were bullshitting for their audience.
But now it's not.
No.
Yeah.
Now they're like,
they believe this shit.
Like we've seen, you know, there's like someone like Ted Cruz, and you know he's just playing the game. And you listen and you're like, all right, bro, like, you know, I get it. This is pro wrestling to you. You get people that are... Marjorie Taylor Greene used to be like an outlier, where you get more people that, you know, they actually believe all of this nonsense. And you're like, dude, I thought this was just a talking point. Yeah,
that's how, like, when I grew up in the Republican Party, you had the politicians manipulated the base with like this guns, God, and freedom, you know, kind of rhetoric. But it was always an act, because these are like people who have $15 million homes in Maryland and send their kids to the same school as Nancy Pelosi. But now it's like the base that they relied on ended up eating the establishment, and so now it's just all the base, and they can try and even someone as hardcore neocon as like Nikki Haley or even Ron DeSantis, who's just soft MAGA, like, they don't stand a chance, because all that matters is this base that they created in order to gain power, which has now come out to eat them. Kevin McCarthy is a great example of this. That guy, oh my God, like, so funny. This guy is not, he was not ready for the type of politics that he helped create.
Mitch McConnell was going to do his job until he died. And now he's just like, I can't stand talking to these people. Like, you know, for that guy to let go of power while his brain is still active.
Oh, that's one thing I will say is when I was at all the Stop the Steal rallies, you know, leading up to the insurrection and, you know, and the insurrection, when I was at Capitol Hill on January 6th, all of them, you know, had their eyes set on primary challenging the rhinos, the people that weren't towing the line. That's, so you got to give it to MAGA for that. I mean, and they did this with the Tea Party,
but like, to think of it, like, it's not MAGA, right? It's the big money donors who like are looking for a more effective way to, get their policy positions out. Right? I feel like, well, actually,
but those people themselves had to come around to MAGA. And now you're seeing even Wall Street, which used to be very solidly pro-Biden, is coming around to Trump again. Like the big guys on Wall Street who went all in on Biden in 2020 are kind of 50-50 between Biden and Trump now, because they realized that honestly, they just class awareness. They've realized that the base of the Democratic Party is shifting further and further to the left, and it is going to soon start to come for their privilege. Corey Robin, by the way, he writes this great book called The Reactionary Mind, and he says the entire point of conservatism, if you think about its 200-year history, is to protect the private life of power. Right. And so for a while, the Democratic Party was able to do that really well, like since the Clinton era. But increasingly, the base of the Democratic Party is constantly putting its elected representatives to these purity tests. And so the private life of power is shifting back over to the right wing.
Yeah, which is strange because the base itself is extremely mistrustful of people with power and influence and wealth. They say that
if they disagree with them, I mean,
no, but just conceptually, right? Like they are very anti-globalists. They don't like they like specific billionaires, but they don't like the idea of a power over them. Right. Like when you speak to them of their values and because most people in the conservative base are leftists who don't like trans people. Like that's essentially what they're. But
I'm not sure that's totally on board with that, but it is a funny idea.
But we talk to them and they want to break up monopolies. They do not feel like corporate control is good. And if they knew what the word regulation meant, they would be pro-regulation. They're not, because they don't.
Like we do the experiment where we talk about communism and socialism without saying the words, and you get people just very agreeable. They're like, yes, of course. And then you say the words, and then suddenly their programming kicks back in, and all of it.
Well, and a lot of these people are still kind of suffering a Reaganite hangover. Like the things they'll tell you are these sort of Reaganite quotes that they were raised on, even though their modern politics is much more like fascist. But again, I mean, I think it's a mistake to call these people leftists who dislike trans people, because they are fascists. And fascism always borrowed energy from the left by appealing to working class people, appealing to prejudice, while all doing so in protection of power, which is exactly what the right wing is doing.
It was weaponizing progressive,
Yeah, I agree in terms of from a policy perspective. You look at what Turning Point is doing or what Heritage Foundation is doing. I totally agree, but I think their actual boots on the ground, they have ensured that the people that vote for them do not understand policy at all. They can't engage with it. They do not get it. And so because of that, they have experienced this. They are starved from a policy perspective, and because there's this vacuum inside of them, they have class awareness that they don't realize they have, and that's something that Walter and I found a lot at QAnon and MAGA. But it does not matter, because they do not give a shit about. They would prioritize keeping gay people out of classrooms over anything that would actually be to their economic benefit. Right. Even if they know this is good for me and I would want that. And Trump, they would be thrilled if Trump said it.
If you levied a 5% income tax that they could be assured was going to kick trans people out of bathrooms, they would do it. Like, they would agree. They're non-ideological. Benito Mussolini had this great quote where he said, "Fascism is an affair of the gut. It's about the emotion. It's not about appealing to reason. It's actually, the first fascists were fundamentally anti-rational, not irrational, but deliberately against reason, because it was all about appealing to emotion, because the emotion was your guiding heart, your gut instinct. That was what the real Italians or the real Germans or the real Americans were. It's something you feel, not something you think about.
It's easier to weaponize, because I mean, Mussolini even said, how socialism and a lot of these leftist principles were difficult to rally everyone around. I mean, and I still think that's a lot of that holds true today. I mean, there's a lot of steps you need to take if you want to be a real leftist. Like, you got to read theory. It's like, oh, you haven't read theory? Oh, and so there's a lot to it that you need to go through. I mean,
and this is why,
know.
like,
I mean,
I don't know how you feel about this, Walter, but this is why I don't call myself a communist. Like, if you map my political views, it is anarcho-communism, democratic confederalism, some sort of fusion.
Oh, God damn it. We were texting about this. Okay, Max, you're going to love this. You were like, was it LibSoc, libertarian socialist?
Yeah.
No.
And I was like, every libertarian socialist I've met has been batshit insane. And I was wait, I got to hear this, bro.
You can't be both. How can you be both?
Well, so libertarian doesn't mean what it does. So libertarian always in the European context meant left-wing. It wasn't until Ayn Rand and what's his face? Why am I forgetting the father of libertarian? Anyway, the guy who inspired Reagan.
Friedman?
Milton Friedman. Libertarian becomes a right-wing idea, a pro-capitalist idea, whereas for the 200 years previously, it meant anarchy. It meant left anarchy. In the same way, anarchy now, people talk about, I'm an anarcho-capitalist. It doesn't make any sense. Capitalism is fundamentally anti-anarchist.
Well, yeah, but I would say, like, I mean, certainly in the last 50 years, libertarianism has meant a rejection of government. Like, right.
Well, but anarchists also, they reject the state as an institution, but not necessarily all of its functions. So, like, Noam Chomsky talks about how you could be an anarchist who still supports welfare programs as a bridge to a more communitarian model of society. So I don't call myself a libertarian socialist for the same reason, the confusion we're having here. I try not to call myself anything these days because, like, again, it's literally just because people have these triggers that, like, you say the word communist, you say the word fascist, you say the word socialist, and it just means certain things to them that they don't actually understand.
Sure.
And it's the same, like, if I operate in a post-Soviet country, with deep scars about the history of what they think is communism, which is Soviet state capitalism under a Marxist-Leninist model. They were oppressed by the hammer and sickle for the better part of the 20th century. If you go to a place like India or Latin America, the hammer and sickle is a symbol of freedom. It means liberation for the working people. For Ukrainians, for a bunch of people in that sphere of influence, it means oppression. And it was. So I don't call myself a communist. It is the same thing. Yeah, I mean, like, all these categories start to break down because...
Well, I mean, but I feel like you have to use language in the context of your current setting, right? Like,
I believe in workplace democracy. I'm a democratic absolutist.
That's a good.
I'm a democratic absolutist, and I think that political democracy is impossible without democracy in the workplace. That's how I describe it to people.
I think that's a good tag for that. I genuinely feel that across the spectrum, people totally buy in to the idea of worker rights. Just the specifics, if they have a predisposition to leftist or far right politics, they'll have pre-programmed.
Yeah, and it's amazing the work that's been done to demonize unions, just like the concept of workers collectivizing, like, just the concept in general, like workers collectivizing for, and it has been so demonized whenever I talk to MAGA. These are members of
corruption.
Like
And
I
big
spoke,
unions.
I was in Detroit. I was in Detroit at the Turning Point, Trump rally, and I spoke to a woman who was a member of, she was United Auto Workers, she was UAW. And, she was like, I wish Michigan was a right to work state. And I'm like, she took valid criticism of, the industry changing, and then just put it into like, well, this union's evil and stuff. And it's just insane to me how it's like, it's been demonized. I'm like, you realize, the 1%, the billionaires, they collectivize all the time. Like, literally everyone that's gotten what they wanted is collectivized and forced people to, accept their terms. So
people like, it's the idea that's like, what I saw online, like, did you send me the people on the right are like, tyranny.gov, tyranny.com.
Yeah, like,
Yeah,
Right.
no, it's like workplace. Like, I mean, Noam Chomsky talks about how like McDonald's exercises a regime of control over its employees that Stalin couldn't have dreamed of. They have to show up at a certain time. They have to wear a certain thing. They have to say all these phrases. Maybe Chick-fil-A is a better example. I worked at Chick-fil-A. It is a
Did you do their
fascist
summer
hell
camp?
nightmare. No, I didn't. Probably why I have less therapy than I might have. But yeah, I mean, like Chick-fil-A exercises more authority over the daily lives of its employees than Stalin could have imagined instituting in the Soviet Union. It holds their economic fortunes hostage unless people toe the line, wear the right things, save my pleasure, work for minimum wage, don't try and organize. That's a regime of total control, and we don't even think about this, but this is all of our employers hold us hostage. Unless you're like internet yappers like us who've somehow tried to escape 9-to-5 work.
We've gotten so off topic. I love this. I don't even know what this podcast is anymore. But yeah, you get people.
What is the Ukraine? What are we here?
Yeah, let's go over like how much. So there's been multiple like funding bills for Ukraine. How much have we given to Ukraine so far?
I don't have the precise number, but it's tens of billions of dollars. Collectively representing it's $10 billion worth of aid, which I don't think people realize. That's something different than handing them duffel bags full of cash. It's something on the order of about 5% of our defense budget.
And here's the funny part. So all right, so the first aid package I know was, so American military had a lot of older equipment that they were constantly shuffling around, and they figured, all right, well, if we give this to Ukraine, it's cheaper or more cost effective than us just constantly shuffling this everywhere.
Yeah.
So Ukraine initially got, America's hand-me-downs, and that was its first form of aid. But, on paper it was, 40 billion, 20 billion, right? And then everyone's like, oh my God, this is an outrage. Why are we sending money over? A normal aid package is us sending money to our own vendors, American companies, and Northrop Grumman, the Raytheons, the money has never left the United States.
Right.
And now that country owes us for money that we effectively gave ourselves. It is the dopest hustle I've ever seen.
It is so impressive, man. And that's what I think, and especially I have a friend who works. Okay, this is an old family friend who I would not choose as a friend now, but one of those people that you're saddled with from birth. He works in the military industrial complex, right? He's a libertarian, like MAGA libertarian. Okay, libertarian's not really a thing. These people come fascist the second the chips are down. Sure. But anyway,
he's
one of these people. Yeah. And he's talking about like the Ukraine. Oh, what about like he all of my Instagram stories from Ukraine, he'd respond to and be like, "Are they making a good use of my tax dollars or like all my $7 billion?" And I was like, dude, like your entire job is acquisitions for the state, for the Department of Defense. Like, you understand how this process works. You have probably received money as a result of these Ukraine aid packages. This is all going to people in Florida and Laguna Beach. And yeah, it's like, it's going to the military industrial complex, which he works in. But it didn't matter because in his brain, the talking point is, oh, Ukraine, my tax is bad.
Bro, wait. The brain rot is like, we were talking to a guy who worked as a contractor for the MTA who didn't want government spending on public works projects and complained that Biden wasn't putting money in his pocket. Trump's put money in his pocket. And we're just...
many such cases.
Yeah. So, but it's easy to just, it's like Ukraine is corrupt. And then they talk about how, the money's being sent over there. And like you said, in their mind, it's a briefcase, just duffel bags full of just, unmarked dollar, bills. And then, the top officials are just saying, one for you, two for me, and taking their cut off the top. So I'm like, it's not really like that. When you send a bunch of missiles, you can't take your cut of the
Yeah.
missiles.
Yeah, this opens an interesting thing because, like, as someone who works in Ukraine, there are problems with corruption even as far down the line as that. There are literally, like, the United States can keep track of these amounts of weapons up into the point of delivery to the frontline generals. But even in some of those cases, a lot of these older generals who grew up in the Soviet Union and have this, like, very grifty mindset will still try and, like, sell some of those weapons and stuff. So again, it's like, the corruption thing is true. Ukraine does have a corruption problem. And ironically, I think the people who always point that out don't realize that what that comes from is Moscow. It comes from the Soviet legacies. And if you want to have them stop being constantly undercut and influenced by corruption, you have to basically prevent Moscow from exerting influence on Ukraine and allow them to navigate more towards the European Union, which has all sorts of problems, but is going to really tamp down the corruption side of things. If that's what you're worried about, if the corruption is the problem, then you would be anti-Russia because Russia is more corrupt than Ukraine.
Yeah,
and they're responsible.
Yeah, and because it was fun. Okay, you know, this has like been like a very, we're all leftists, and you know, the only thing we hate, you know, more than MAGA is our other friends that are leftists.
Exactly.
But the one thing that I think the leftists got very right is pointing out the fact that it's hilarious that if it's a Russian billionaire, we automatically call them an oligarch.
Yeah.
Without thinking. It's like, oh, Russian oligarchs. No problem. Across the board, all of us do it. It is,
German job creators and American entrepreneurs, Russian oligarchs.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, we don't revere them as like this self-made. We don't engage in this self-made mythical horse shit. And I was like, God damn it. And it took me a second. I was like, I totally do that. Damn it. I was like, I need to start calling. Yeah, I need to start calling
everyone's they're all oligarchs. Everyone's an oligarch. And it's important to use this language to understand when consent is being manufactured, right? American billionaires are oligarchs. And if you want to talk about hustle, man, like the Ukrainians and the Russians and the Belarusians who like made their billions in the aftermath of the fall of the Soviet Union were the biggest hustlers. They make the Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, rags to riches, quote unquote, story seem ridiculous. A lot of these were just like, they didn't even come from privilege and power, and they took advantage of the chaos of the fall of the Soviet Union to just hoard massive riches and wealth through the most innovative means possible. And yet we celebrate like people whose zip codes have the highest tax code in the country and whose parents gave them small loans of $1 million as hustlers.
$1 million, that is a small loan.
Yeah. For the Greenwich.
Listen,
Greenwich crew.
Peter Thiel and Soros they give much bigger loans when you toe the line, so I don't know who's paying for your streams, but like Soros, Max talks about a lot. We're like, if it's just code word for Jew, like, it's the Jewish cabal, but you just say Soros. And then, of course, he, as the Jewish person, is also funding the student encampments.
Which are opposing the Jewish state.
I'm like, what is it? I'm like, all right, what is it, everyone? So yeah.
Zelensky, the Nazi Jew.
It is possible. Like, there's plenty of people in the United States that like Laura Loomer is like, she's Jewish. She's incredibly, and huge genocide denier, apartheid enthusiast, and she is totally aligned with Nazis, total like complete fascist herself. We've interviewed her, and she's also surprisingly Jewish. Netanyahu is engaged in his whole Nazi revisionism recently.
I guess one last question on Ukraine before we drift into far left politics and start cannibalizing our fellow leftists.
what's the thing that you're probably most surprised about? What is something that, like, without being there and seeing for yourself, you probably wouldn't understand about the conflict?
I think how difficult it is to fit Ukraine into any of your historical and political categories. It is an onion, and the deeper you get into it, the more confusing it is. It is very much, every time you run into some aspect of its history, you think you can plot it on a graph of other historical movements. You think that you can come to some sort of, what I'm trying to say is all binary assumptions about Ukraine fall apart when you go there and you experience it, right? I mean, like, what my best friend in Ukraine is a Jewish girl, and she used to get protected by the far right sector guys in Kharkiv from anti-Semitic persecution by pro-Russian people. And like, that doesn't make any sense unless you've spent enough time in Ukraine to understand how its society works and how it breaks all of the categories that you as a Westerner would like to graft onto it. Which is why I always say people need to talk to Ukrainians about their perspective, particularly Ukrainian leftists, because they feel very abandoned by how the international left has treated them during this conflict. But yeah, Ukraine breaks all your categories. I can't recommend visiting enough. It's a beautiful place full of wonderful people who really love their land and their history and their food and their country.
And it's more bomb-proof than you think.
And it's more bomb-proof than Ukraine. Yeah, I mean, like, I'm not saying, like, the United States is basically unaffordable to live in. But if you don't mind living in a country that's currently undergoing invasion and occasional missile strikes, you can live out your trad wife agrarian farm maxing dreams in the west of Ukraine for about 1/10.
You can homestead there?
To just buy a single family home in most states. Yeah, you can do your homesteading TikToks from the Ukrainian countryside for far cheaper than pretty much anywhere in the United States.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, most of your feeds would be in Starlink.
All right.
You have to go to Elon's Starlink.
No, hey.
My God.
Come on, listeners. We're going to drink some raw milk out in the fields of Ukraine.
That's right.
Let's do it. All right, anyways, Charles, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks,
Great
Max.
to have you. Stay safe out there.
Thanks, Max.
Thank you
Thanks,
for
Walter.
representing the Azov Battalion, Charles. And we
You're welcome.
Appreciate it.